Masechet Moed Katan, Daf Chaf He. On this daf, we get to read some of the actual eulogies that professional eulogizers gave for various sages, some very beautiful poetry and imagery. But before that, we begin with the Mishnah that says, "En kor'in velo chosin velo mavrin ella kerovav shel met." That these three mourning practices, rending garments and removing the garment, revealing the shoulder, and mavrin, this is the seudat havra'ah, this is the first meal that the relatives and friends provide for the mourner, and probably comes from the word bar, which means food, so want to feed them, or maybe bara, to bari, like to bring to health the mourner. So that first meal, all that is only done for the relatives of the one who died. In other words, those close relatives who have to mourn, they have to do these three practices, whereas other people, like students, friends, or other people, should not be doing these three mourning practices. And also, when we do that seudat havra'ah, that first meal that we have with the egg and the bread, it should be done when the bed is still upright, not a turned over bed. Okay, there's two ways to interpret this Mishnah. Is it talking about specifically on Chol HaMoed? That because if someone dies on Chol Moed and then they're buried and they would still do so seudat havra'ah, then because Chol Moed, don't turn the bed over, because you're not really starting all the morning practices on that during the holiday. Or is it talking about anytime, all year round, that the seudat havra'ah is done when the bed is still upright, and only afterwards would they turn it over? Okay, those are two different opinions about it. But we're going to focus now on the first section of the Mishnah, that all these various mourning practices are only done for a relative of the dead and not others. So now we ask, if a great sage dies, then everybody in his community should also mourn, because they are his relatives. Now we just clarified this language. Is everybody related to the sage? Right? This is not like the Syrian community where everybody is actually related. But right, so I don't mean literally. No, rather, what we mean here is that everybody is like his relatives. So that just like relatives have to do those morning practices, so too all the people, students, and the people in his synagogue or community. So that's what we mean. And anyway, the Baraita continues and says, yes, everybody tears their clothes and bears their shoulders and eats that first seudah, and they do that in the public square. So this contradicts the Mishnah. The Mishnah said only relatives. Here it says that the students of the Chacham also do that. So the answer is, La siricha de lav chachamhu. When the Mishnah says only relatives, we're talking about a regular person, not a chacham. But you're right. This Baraita, they work fine together. The Baraita is talking about a chacham. Yes, so we do that. If he's not a chacham, then it's only relatives. And even if someone is a close friend of the person, it's not appropriate for them to tear their clothes. V'adam kasherhu chayove michayev lemikra detanya. Well, hold on. A second question on the Mishnah. There's another law. Even someone who's not a chacham, he's not a great Torah scholar, but he's an upright person. He does a lot of good deeds. He's a Baal Chesed, an upright person. Also, others have to tear their clothes. There's a pretty harsh statement. The Baraita says that why do sons and daughters of a person die when they are children? Why does a person lose their children? So that he will cry when an upright person dies. In other words, when an upright person dies, he'll remember his sorrow from losing his children, and then he'll be more ready to come to tears for an upright person. So the Gemara itself says that's pretty harsh. So you're going to kill his children just so he'll cry and mourn? So you're taking his children as a security, right? Even beforehand. So like just in case you're not going to be sad enough when an upright person dies, then he should lose his children even before that happened. That doesn't seem fair. Ella, okay, you're right. Well, let's change it a little bit less harsh. If an upright person died and someone else did not mourn them and cry proper enough, then the person will then only then will that person lose his children. Okay, here we have it more in a more positive statement. Anyone who does cry and mourn over an upright person, all of his sins are forgiven because he gives honor to the upright person. It shows that he really understands the good values and what's true in life, and that itself is a teshuvah process. Okay, so anyway, all that was part of a question because the Mishnah said only relatives tear their clothes and bare their shoulders. And here it says, for an upright person, everyone around should also tear their clothes and bare their shoulders. And so our answer is, when the Mishnah is talking about a regular person, he's not a chacham, he's not an upright person. But you're right, if indeed he was, then other people would also have to mourn. Third question, there's another law that even for a regular person, if you happen to be present at a time when the person actually dies, when his last breath leaves him, then all those present there, in wherever it is, in home or in the hospital bed, they also have to mourn. Tanya, Braita teaches that someone who's standing over the dead at the time that he actually dies, he has to tear his clothes. It's similar to if one sees a Sefer Torah that's burnt, just witnessing that, one needs to tear their clothes. And so this is similar. A person is a holy vessel for God's neshama, and as that is leaving, that's similar to a Sefer Torah being destroyed. And so that's one has to tear for both. And so this is yet a third contradiction against the Mishnah. Mishnah said only relatives tear their clothes. Here we see anybody tears their clothes if they're there, if they're present. And the answer is we have to assume that the Mishnah is talking about a case where the person is not around while the person actually died. He only heard about it afterwards. And so therefore, the Mishnah says only relatives tear their clothes, but that's only if it's not a chacham, not an upright person, and the person's not there. If any of those other three criteria apply, then all other people also do have to tear their clothes. Okay, now story. Rav Safra died, the other sages did not tear their clothes. Amri lag amri said, "Oh, we didn't study with him directly. We weren't his students, so they didn't do it." Amalu Abaye corrected them. Mitanya hadav shemet. It doesn't say when your teacher died. It says chacham shemet tanya, and this person is chacham. Even if he wasn't your teacher, if he was a chacham and you know of, and you know that he died, then everybody must tear for him. And in any case, every day we are repeating the words of Rav Safra. So even if you're not directly a student, you are indirectly his student because you heard from someone who heard from him. And therefore, everybody should tear their clothing for the death of Rav Safra. Okay, so the students here now stand corrected by Abaye. Sevur ma'ida hava. But then they thought, well, now it's too late because we already heard about it before, and now maybe it's a day or two later, or some time later, and so that's okay. I guess it's too late. Says no. Abaye corrected them again. This is not too late for a chacham. As long as they're eulogizing him, one must tear their clothes. So perhaps it was some hours, or maybe they had some eulogies after a couple of days. Whenever it was, they were still in the process of eulogizing. So yes, you can still tear. So I said, okay, thank you, Abaye, for correcting us. We'll tear right now. Abaye corrected them a third time. Abaye explained that for a chacham, we honor him by tearing our clothes only actually during the eulogy. And so therefore they should wait until the eulogy. So it's not too late. Another point is that normally one would tear their clothes right at the time of that one hears the person died, or at the time of the burial. But if not, then at the time of the eulogies, and maybe there are other eulogies that are done on hours later or days later, and so or any time like that would be appropriate for the community to tear their clothing for the sage. Ki nach nafshe de Rav Huna, another story when Rav Huna died. Rav Huna, the second generation Bavel, greatest sage, sevur le'otubeh sefer Torah puriyeh, and they wanted to bring a sefer Torah and bury it with him as an honor. He taught Torah, he represented Torah, and so they wanted to put a Torah scroll in the grave with him. Rav Chisda objected to this. Rav Chisda was his student and says something that during his lifetime he did not agree with. Now you're going to do to him? What does it mean he didn't agree with? There is a halakha said till today that one may not be sitting on a bench or a mattress with a Sefer Torah on it also. And so Rav Tachlifa, this is the source of it. He says, I saw Rav Huna that he was going to sit on a bed, and there happened to be a Sefer Torah on it before he sat down. And so what he did is he went and took a jug, turned it over. We saw that they used overturned jugs, for example, to sit on or stand on. So it was like a little table. And he put the Sefer Torah first on the upside down jug, and only then did he sit on the bed. He would not sit on the bed or lie on the bed with a Sefer Torah on it. And so now you want to go and lie him in his grave with a Sefer Torah. That's the same equally disrespectful to the Torah to do that. So he would not have wanted that. So you should not do that. From that story, we see that he had the opinion that one may not sit on a bed that has a Torah on it. Okay. So then, second problem with his Rav Huna's burial, when they tried to, he died in his house or some home, and so they put him in a coffin. And when they tried to exit the door, it would not fit. The coffin was too big for the doorway. So they said, let's take him up to the roof, and we'll lower him from the roof, I guess using ropes or something, and that way we'll get him out. Rav Chisda not be respectful. Chacham should go through the main opening of the door and not from in a roundabout way. So no, you can't lower him from the roof. What are we going to do? So I said, okay, let's move him from this coffin to a smaller coffin that will fit through the door. But Rav Chisda objected again. We have a tradition from him, Rav Huna itself, that for a Chacham, his honor is in the first coffin that he is in. You want to move him to another one is disrespectful. If you move a body, it's not really respectful for the body to be moved like that. And so therefore, no, you should leave him in the coffin. This is the same with Rav Chisda the whole time. He was one that objected to burying him with the Sefer Torah also. So Rav Chisda is defending his teacher's honor. How do we know that you should use the original coffin from the Aron? When King David wanted to bring the Aron to Yerushalayim, he put it on the same cart that had been used before, upon which it was returned by the Pilishtim. And so they move it to a new one. So you see that if something's already in a place and we're comparing the Aron, which we have to treat with respect, to a body also that we have to treat with respect. And so they didn't use a new one. Okay. So what did they do in the end? Perum baba ve'apekuha. They had no choice but to break the doorway and widen it, and only then were they able to bring Rav Huna out. Good. Petach ale Rabbi Abba. Ra'oi haya Rabbeinu shetishresh alav shechina ela shebavel garma le. Rabbi Abba, he gave a eulogy, and this is what he said in his eulogy. Says, our sage, Rav Huna, was worthy that Shekhinah should rest upon him, except that he lived in Bavel. And Bavel is a lower level of Kiddusha than Eretz Yisrael, and that's why he did not merit to have Kiddusha, to have Shekhinah. upon him, Shekhinah upon him, like some kind of sense of prophecy. Metiv Rab Nachman bar Chista, Amri la Rab Chanan bar Chista. So one of the sons of Chista, whoever it was, objected to this eulogy. You don't usually have questions about a eulogy, right? But here he did. Hayo haya devar Adonai Yechezkel ben Buzia Kohen beres Kastim. Look at Yechezkel. He was in Beres Kastim. He was in Bavel, not in Israel, and yet Hashem's word came to him. So what you prove from here is that one can have prophecy even outside of Israel, even in Bavel. And so therefore, there's not an excuse why you say Rav Huna could have had prophecy, could have had Shekhinah, except in Bavel. It's not true. His father, Chista, hit him on his with the sandal. Son, and I tell you, don't trouble everybody with your dumb questions. So he says, Hayo haya devar Hashem. It doesn't say that Yechezkel first got prophecy in Bavel. It says he had gotten prophecy in Eretz Yisrael. So there you go. Even Yechezkel only was able to achieve prophecy in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, maybe once he achieved in Eretz Yisrael, then he brought those prophecies, maybe even continued prophecy in Bavel. But it's only because of Eretz Yisrael first. So the simple answer to your question. So that's why he hit him with the slipper and said, don't ask questions like that. Okay, more about Rav Huna. Finally, they got his coffin out, and they eulogized him a little bit in Bavel, and then they bring him to Eretz Yisrael to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. So the messengers told Rabbi Ameh Rabbi Aseh that Rav Huna has come. Now they didn't know he was. That means he came in a coffin. They thought he was alive, and he came. He moves. He's moving to Eretz Yisrael. Amru ki avena natam lahabalan nedadlu yedreshin mineh hashta tena nacha ata batrin. So they were not so happy with this. They said when we. Rabbi Ameh Rabbi Aseh says, when we were there in Bavel, we couldn't raise our heads because Rav Huna was so great, so we were subservient to him. And now he's coming here after us. In other words, we're going to lose our jobs. We're going to lose our status. Right now, Rabbi Ameh Rabbi Aseh are the greatest in generation in Israel. If Rav Huna comes, he's going to be greater, and he's going to take over to be Rosh Yeshiva and then give the shiurim. So like, oh no, this is not good that he's coming. And then the Amru Le, I don't know, but no, don't worry. We mean his coffin came. He's not coming himself alive. He passed away. Rabbi Ameh Rabbi Aseh had great respect for him, and so they went out to greet his coffin and be part of the levaya. But Rabbi Ila, Rabbi Chanina Lanefuk, these second two sages did not go. They just stayed in Beit Midrash. They stayed there doing what they were doing. Others say that Rabbi Ila also did go out to the levaya, and it was only Rabbi Chanina that did not go. So he's remembered for, everybody's going to give honor to Rav Huna. He didn't go. So in fact, okay, what's the reason that those who did go to the levaya of Rav Huna go? Why did they go? Because the Braita says that when a coffin is going from one place to another and that's traveling, so all those that are there on the way should stand in a line and they should say the beracha for the avelim and give tanchumim to avelim. So just like one would do at the actual burial site, when the comforters stand in a line and they say words of comfort to the mourners, so too, even when it's traveling on the way, one will do that at different stops. So that's why those in Eretz Yisrael, the Rabbi Ameh Rabbi Aseh, that's why they went to the levaya. It's appropriate. In fact, my time. Okay, what's the reason for those one or two sages who did not go to the levaya? Well, we have a braita that says the opposite. Just because it's traveling, no, you don't have to stand in shura. Only when you actually at the actual time of the burial, maybe when he first leaves the city, right? So then one does all those things. But while it's traveling, you don't have to go into the levaya. So now we say, wait, kashana hadadeh. These two braitot themselves are contradictory. So lakasha kan shildo kayemet kan beshen shildo kayemet. Okay, when the person's skeleton is all intact, in other words, the person died recently and the body's still more or less intact, then one has to go and milaveh the met and greet the mourners all along the way. But if it's not, let's say someone is being reinterred after a while, then they're going to bring the body to Eretz Yisrael, a year later. So then, by then, the skeleton is not intact. Then people do not have to stand in the line and comfort the mourners. Okay, so now once we resolve these two B'raitot in that way, and now it doesn't answer the question because this is a recent burial, and so the body was intact. So that now we have to ask, why didn't he come? So Rav Huna, his skeleton was intact, and so therefore we understand the sages that did go out to the Levaya. What's the reason for those who didn't? And the answer is the sages that didn't go out, they didn't hear, they didn't know that, they weren't sure if the skeleton was there, they didn't know when he died, they didn't know if he died, they didn't know he was there, so they didn't have all full information. That's why they didn't go. But otherwise, yes, one would have to go. Amri, okay, there was more, many steps in the burial of Rav Huna. They have a lot of questions along the way. So finally gets to Yisrael, and now the question is, where should we bury him? Rav Huna ribes Torah b'Yisrael, Rabbi Chiya ribes Torah b'Yisrael hava. Right, it has to be appropriate for his honor. We can't just bury him anywhere. So Rav Huna, he taught Torah publicly to all of Israel, and who else did? Rabbi Chiya. Right, a couple generations earlier, and he was just as great in his dissemination of Torah to all of Israel. So we should bury him in the same cave as Rabbi Chiya. Now remember, in those days, they didn't always bury underground like we usually do today, but rather there were caves with a big stone on top, and they moved the stone and then place the bodies within the cave. That's also considered proper burial. Man me'ayele. Then the next question is, who's going to go into the cave? It's like kind of scary to go into the cave of a great sage. So Amar lehu Rav Chaga, ana me'ayel naleh. Rav Chaga had a lot of self-confidence. He says, I think I am worthy to go. Because I studied all of the Talmud in front of him, in front of Rabbi Chiya, when I was 18 years old, and I had never seen a seminal emission before that. So I learned the whole Torah in purity of thought. And so that's one reason why he's worthy. And second, mashma le kamed yad'eh be'obadehen. And I was an attendant to the Bichia, and so I saw all of his amazing deeds. For example, one day, the strap of his tefillin was inside out. The black side was on his head, and the white side was showing. And he was so upset, Bichia was so upset about that he wasn't wearing tefillin exactly the right way. He fasted for 40 days because of that. So Rabbi Chaga was one of the few people that really knew the inside story of the greatness of Rabbi Chiya. So he says, because I had such a close relationship with him, I will go into the cave. So he goes in. And you had Rabbi Chiya there in the middle, and on the right side buried was his son Yehuda, and on the left side his son Chizkiah was buried, all in this family cave. Yehuda tells Chizkiah, his brother. Okay, I don't know how you imagine this, right? Did they get up from the grave and then speak to each other, or is it? Are we meant to imagine that Rabbi Chaga is like thinking to himself out loud? What would one brother here say to the other? Okay, so however you want to picture the story, one brother says to the other, says, stand up from your place. It's not proper to be lying down when Rav Huna is standing here. When the sage walks in, everybody has to stand up. Just stand up for Rav Huna. So he did. And when Chizkiah's corpse stood up, a pillar of fire rose with him. He was also a great person. Rav Chaga saw that. He was scared out of his wits. So he stood up Rav Huna's coffin. He kind of stabilized it, without, with not in the usual way that you would put it to its final rest. And he left. He didn't want to be there. He was afraid. Unfak ata. V'hai delai anash anash. Mishum dezakvel aroned Rabuna. And you know what? The only reason why he was not punished is because he set up Rav Huna's coffin there. It was a kind of a human shield for that pillar of fire. And so that's a fantastic story about the death and burial of Rav Huna. All right, and now the next story. Kinach nafshed Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda now was a student, right, who was defending Rav Huna's honor. Eventually, he died as well. And the people had said, "Oh, let's Rav Chisda, such a great sage, let's honor him by burying a Sefer Torah together with him." And it says, well, his teacher did not agree with that. Should we do that to him? Right? And Rav Chisda himself objected to doing that to Rav Huna. So, okay, I guess they didn't do it. Then, obviously the students and the community tore their clothes because he was a great chacham. And then they said, you know what, he was so great, perhaps we should not mend the tear. So that's not the law. When a chacham is true, you have to tear your clothes, but that's it after they turn away from the coffin and they're done. Then they can mend the tear. So it's okay. It was okay to mend it. Okay, next story. When these two sages, Rabba bar Huna and Rav Hamnuna, died, they brought their bodies from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. Then they got to a bridge, a narrow bridge that only one person could walk at the right time, at the same time. And so now it was not clear, since they were walking together, who should go first over the bridge. It's true they're dead, but nevertheless, still we have to respect them, and who should go first. The camels both stopped. They didn't want to decide who's greater of these two sages. Happened to be an Arab traveler there, and he saw what was going on, and he asked whoever was leading these camels that were carrying the bodies, he said, what's going on here? Why these camels just stopped at the entrance to the bridge? Says, oh, these are two sages that are buried in these coffins, and they are giving honor to each other. And this one is saying, the master, you should go first, and the other one saying, no, you should go first. So this Arab, he decided, right, which one should go. Maybe he's waiting behind them. He wants to get by already. So he says, I think that Rabba bar Huna should go first. He's the son of a great sage, and so it's appropriate. Okay, so that's what happened. And so the camel of Rabba bar Huna proceeded, and he went first. But as a consequence, the teeth, molars and teeth of the Arab fell out because he disrespected Rav Hamnuna. So you see, that's why no one else wanted to get involved. They know by respecting one, you're disrespecting the other. So even if you made a right decision, still there's some aspect of disrespect. No right way out of that one. Okay. Petach ale hahu yanoka. And now they came to Eretz Yisrael. And a young person gave a eulogy, and this is what he said: Geza yeshishim ala mi Bavel ve'imo sefer milchamot. The shoot of an ancient line means Rabba bar Rav Huna, since he was the son of Rav Huna, who was also himself great, so we call him the shoot of a great. He's a descendant of a great person. Came from here to Eretz Yisrael from Bavel, and he brought with him Sefer Milchamot. Now, Sefer Milchamot is mentioned in Sefer Devarim, and Peshat is referring to some work that is lost now, some book of wars. Midrash relates it to the Torah itself. So Torah itself is called Sefer Milchamot, and that seems to be referring to Rav Hamnuna. So this great person of great lineage came, and he brought with him a Sefer Torah embodied in the personage of Rav Hamnuna. וכעת קיפוד הוכפלו לראות בשוד ושבט הבא משנער. And these two birds, pelican and the bittern, these are associated with curses in Yeshaya, and their curses have been doubled to see the ruin and brokenness that came from Shinar. In other words, this bad news, sad news that's coming from Babel with the loss of these two sages is a double curse upon us, upon Am Yisrael. Hashem has become angry with his world, and because of that, he has taken these two souls, and yet Hashem is happy because now he has them. He has these two sages with him in Shamayim, and so Hashem is happy, like a new bride greeting her groom. So too Hashem greeting these souls. So we are sad, but up in heaven they are happy. And so Hashem, who rides upon the clouds, is joyous and happy because these innocent and righteous souls have come to him. Okay, we have an English translation here. There's also an English translation from Cincino, and the translator there is made it rhyme. Some of the Hebrew actually also rhymes. So, but this is fun the way they did it. I'll read it. A sign of ancient stock from Babylon came with records of prowess in combat and fame. Twice numerous pelican and bitter from far came for the ravage and ruin in Shinar. When God views his world with displeasure, he sees his great souls in exacting measure, awaiting their coming as new brides with delight, and riding on Arabot in empyrean height, he welcomes the souls of the pure and right. Okay, at least that gives us some sense of the beauty of the poetry from the original. And now we're going to quote some more eulogies. Kinach nafshe de Rabina patach ale hahu safdana. And so when Ravina died, this eulogizer, and these were professional eulogizers who, they were paid for this, and so these were some of the great poets of the time. As he said, Temarim hani orosh al sadik katamar, nasim leilot kayamim al mesim leilot kayamim. So ye palms, sway your heads and deplore a saint, a noble palm that is no more, who days and nights in meditation spent. For him, day and night, let us lament. So midah k'midah, just like he stayed up all night to learn Torah, and so his nights were like days, so too we should stay up all night and cry for his passing. And you note the references to Pesukim in Tanakh, like Sadik Katamar Yifrach from his Shel Yom HaShabbat. So these poets, as most Hebrew poets do, they quote constantly quoting Pesukim. And so here's a funny story. This is Rav Asher went to Bar Kippur. Bar Kippur was another professional professional eulogizer, right? These were, I mean, some of them could be laymen, maybe just knew them, but it sounds like this is a professional. That's what Rav Asher asks him. Bar Kippur, what are you going to say when I die? Hahu Yoma, on that day, my amat, right? I want to get a preview. I should have to wait, right? Wait till I die to hear these nice words about myself, right? Can you give me a preview of what you might say about me? So Bar Kippur says, you see, he's not called a rabbi here. So these are not, some of them could, rabbis also gave eulogies, but not necessarily. Amar le Amina, here's what I would say. Im barazim nafla yitzal hevet. מה יעשו אזובי קיר? לוויתן בחכה הועלה, מה יעשו דגי רקק? בנחל שוטף נפלה חכה, מה יעשו מגבים? In English, if a flame among the cedars fall, what avails the lichen on the wall? So the point is that Rav Asher will be compared to a flame, to a cedar tree. Cedar tree is so strong, and yet a flame can destroy it. So if he dies, what about everybody else? We're just like a simple tree, and so we have no hope. If Leviathan by hook be hauled to land, what hope have fishes of a shallow strand? In other words, Rav Asher is like a Leviathan who's caught by a hook. His death is like Leviathan being caught. If he's a great sage with great merit and he dies, what hope does all the other fishes have? If fish in rushing stream by hook be caught, what death may in marshy ponds be wrought? Right? He's like in a rushing stream and hard to catch, and everybody else is like in a little puddle. So in other words, if he dies like this, we have no hope. Okay, I don't know what to think about this eulogy, but Amar le bar Avin. So Bar Kipuk was one professional eulogizer, Bar Avin was another. Maybe they were competing. He says, Chas v'shalom dechaka b'shalhevet b'sadikei amina. Bar Avin says, what a terrible eulogy. You're comparing a great tzaddik to someone that's taken by fire, or like a fish that's caught on a hook. These are not respectful, dignified ways of dying or describing a righteous person, right? This is what a horrible eulogy. Not inspiring at all. All right, so Mayamat. Okay, so this is, what would you say, right? Well, you professional eulogizer. Amina, here's what I would say. Right? Weep ye for the mourners, not for what is lost. He found him rest. 'Tis we are let distressed. Right? Don't worry about the deceased. The deceased is on his way to a good place. Right? We are the problem, right? And don't cry. Don't cry for the dead. Okay. Now this also sounds like, nice. It's probably you can find a parallel in Stoic types of eulogies, but this is also not very respectful. Right? The point of this is that, don't worry about the dead. Yeah, they'll be all right. Don't cry for them. Cry for the children or the wife who are lost. But this is not respectful either, right? The point of eulogy is to say, what a great person we lost, all that Torah, all those good deeds, right? You should cry about the dead and what that person went through and what they gave us. So this is demeaning and trivializing the dead. So also not good. Rav Ashi was offended by them, and because when a great sage gets offended, those who are the perpetrators always get some kind of punishment. In this case, their feet became crooked. So they overturned or somehow. So something a deformity with their feet. When eventually that day came and Rav Ashi died, Bar Kipuk and Bar Avin did not show up, right? They knew that I don't think Rav Ashi would want us here. And they were afraid of getting further punishment. And Rav Ashi would say that both of these eulogizers cannot perform chalitza. In order to perform chalitza, you have to be wearing a sandal and you have to take off that shoe. But because their feet were deformed, they would not be able to put on the shoe and take off the shoe. And so they would not be able to perform chalitza. Okay, so you see that it's very important to eulogize a great sage, because we have to remember and be inspired by their example. On the other hand, it's also some dangerous business. You don't want to say the wrong thing. And if anyone has given the eulogy nowadays, that it's always difficult to say just the right thing, and you don't want to make sure not to offend anyone. All right, and I guess that's the danger of hearing his eulogy while he was alive. Okay, Rava ki hava atat lediglat amar lebar avin. Rava came to the Tigris River, and it was very wavy, and he was afraid of being swept away. So he went to Bar Abin, who was a professional poet. Says, please say a prayer. Maybe you could compose a nice prayer that will save us from this water. Al taznichenu keot me'emara. You see, this rhymes in Hebrew, and so he says the majority of the third came into water. A poetic reference to the Jewish people, making reference to Yeshaya. So in other words, some of your people, God, have come into water. Please remember us and have mercy. And even though we have strayed from you, like a woman strays from her husband, and we have not always been faithful to you, Hashem. Nevertheless, do not forsake us, like the sign of memara, of a sotah. So nice analogy. Just like when a woman strays from her husband, she is tested by memara, and if she's found guilty is not good. So too, we feel we are being tested by this water coming here, and although we may not be worthy, right? Please do not let us suffer by this water, just like a sotah is found guilty by water. Rather have mercy on us. So actually, it's very, very nice and creative poetry. Chanin Yochanan Zera Baba, Yaakov, Yosef, Shemuel, Chiya, Menachem, Siman. Okay, we're going to see a whole bunch of eulogies now coming up, and this is a mnemonic to remember the order of the sages that we are going to be talking about. So Chanin is Rabbi Chanin, Chataneh de ben Yahava. He was the son-in-law of the Nasi. La kahavule banan. He didn't have children. Finally, they prayed and prayed, and he had a child. So, but sadly, tragically, on the very day that the child was born, Rabbi Chanin died. And so it was bittersweet. On the one hand, he had a child after praying so long, but then the Rabbi Chanin, the father, died on that very day, and so he was not able to enjoy bringing up the child. So the eulogizer got up and said, Simcha lituga nefcha, sason v'yagon nidbaku, be'et simchato ne'enach, be'et haninato abad hanino. Joy is turned to sorrow, and gladness and linked with sadness. When the time of joy came nigh, the father heaved a dying sigh at the birth of his gracious little son. The gracious sire's life was done, right? And gracious, that's his name, Hanin, and so he puts in the name of Rabbi Chanina, Bet Chaninato, at the time that he was graced and had a son, so that grace itself was lost. Asiku lechanan al shemeh, and they named the baby 8 days later at his berit. I assume they named him Hanan after the father who died. Okay, what a fantastic daf! You get to really feel the joy and the pain of the sages from 2,000 years ago in a very personal way. Quite amazing to have these poems recorded. Kinach nafshed Rabbi Yochanan petach ale Rabbi Yitzchak abad Elazar. Rabbi Yochanan, the greatest sage of Eretz Yisrael, first and second generation Amorah, to whom Rambam attributes the entire writing of the Yerushalmi. So when he died, that must have been a very great day of sadness. And so when he died, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar, this is a rabbinic eulogy now. He said, "Kasheh hayom l'Yisrael kiyom bo hashemesh b'sahoraim." Today is as terrible for Israel as the day when the sun sets in the middle of the day. Pasuk from Amos, talking about a terrible day in the future when it will be dark in the middle of the day, maybe an eclipse or something. Rabbi Yochanan himself, the one who died, said this, talking about the day Yoshiyah died, and Yoshiyah was a great righteous king, and so this is a national event of mourning. And so because he said that about Yoshiyahu the king, so the student says the same thing about Rabbi Yochanan's death. He was like a king of Israel. When Rabbi Yochanan, the same sage, died, Rabbi Ameh sat for 37, like a regular mourner, like a relative would mourn, not like usually when the students would mourn. It was just they would tear their clothes just for that day, but they didn't sit for Shiva. That's not the halacha, but he did. So the sage says Rabbi Ahmed did that on his own. That's only his own opinion, not the standard halacha. After all, Rabbi Chia bar Abba said the name of Rabbi Yochanan himself. Even if someone loses his own teacher, he only sits for one. He tears his clothes and sits on the floor for one day, not 37. So Rabbi Ahmed was not actually even following Rabbi Yochanan's teaching. He did that on his own. When Rabbi Zera died, Rabbi Zera was born in Bavel and moved to Eretz Yisrael. All right, anytime you have a Rabbi, the B means that they got semicha in Eretz Yisrael. When you have someone that's named Rav, that means they were in Bavel, where they did not have official semicha. So Rabbi Zera, even though he was born in Bavel, he was called Rabbi because he eventually moved to Eretz Yisrael. When he died, the eulogizer said, Eretz Shinar, that's a name for Bavel, Hara ve'yalada, gave birth to him. And a Sebi Gidela Shashua, a Sebi, a name for Israel, brought him up. This darling or delight. Oy na la amera rakat ki abeda kelichem data. Rakat, the name for Tiberia. Woe to her because she lost her dearest vessel. Or in rhyme, the land of Shinar was his home of birth. The land of glory reared her darling to fame. Woe is me, said Rakat in lament, for she has lost her choicest ornament. Okay, and the rest of the daf is going to be not eulogies, but rather cosmic events that happened at the death of various sages. When Rabbi Abu died, who was from Caesarea, the pillars of Caesarea were sweating or ran with water, as if the pillars themselves, the city itself, was in tears. The Rabbi Yosef was also from Caesarea, and when he died, from Sipori, the gutters of Sipori flowed with blood. The Rabbi Yaakov ithami ukochabe bimama. When Rabbi Yaakov died, the stars came out in the middle of the day, meaning it got dark in the middle of the day. The Rabbi Aseh akeru kol ilanaya. Rabbi Aseh died. All the trees were uprooted. A big storm came. Rabbi Chia nechitu kefed nura mer kia. When Rabbi Chia died, fiery stones fell from the sky. Rabbi Menachem Rabbi Yosei ishta'u salmanaya vehavu lemechlasaya. When Menachem died, the statues became smooth, like they were smoothed off with a trowel. Statues, it seems to be referring to avodah zarah. So when he died, in his merit, because he was, so against avodah zarah, the statues all over the town, they lost their faces, became blank. The Rabbi Tanchum Bar Chiya itkasesu kol andartaya. Similarly, when he died, the Rabbi Tanchum Bar Chiya, the statues were mutilated. So that's also good. The idols were all mutilated in his merit. The Rabbi Eliashib ihateru shib'in machtarta b'nehar de'ah. When Eliashib died, 70 tunnels were dug in Nehar De'ah, meaning tunnels being used by thieves to go under a house and break in. As while he was alive, his merit protected people from thieves. When he died, they didn't have that protection anymore. When Hamnuna died, hailstones fell from the sky. A lot of these are about natural disasters. This might be related to the idea that that the very laws of nature are dependent on the keeping of the Torah, and therefore when Torah is lost, the very foundations and laws of nature themselves go into chaos, a way of just symbolizing the great loss. Okay. The Rabba and Rav Yosef neshu kefed ifrat ahadadeh. When Rabba and Rav Yosef died, the bridges of the Euphrates rivers kind of collapsed or leaned and were touching each other. When Abaye and Rabba died, the bridges of the Tigris River, that's where they taught on the Tigris River, also kind of collapsed and fell into each other. And when Meshashia died, the palm trees all became thorny to express the great sadness. Some Mefarshim say that these were actually snippets from eulogies, that the eulogizer would come and say, like today, say, oh, today is a very dark day, the skies are dark, it's a cloudy day, and that maybe also be correlated with different natural occurrences that happen on that day. But this is a way of emphasizing in their eulogies the great loss of great people that they had on those days. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen. Amen.